Hey everyone, today I'm going to do a roundup of the top 5 books that I've read so far in 2022 that have had some sort of positive impact on my life. I'm really excited to share them with y'all, so let's get right into it. The first one is The Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. It's a really fun book about Huxley's experience taking psychedelics, which are getting a lot of attention in popular culture and the world of research right now. So I wanted to check it out. I've already made a full review of the book that you can watch. You can find the link down in the description if you want to check it out. My grandma actually watched that video and she texted me afterwards and was like, "Are you on drugs? Fentanyl is the #1 killer in the US." And I had to calm her down and explain to her that I'm not on drugs. So don't worry, Grams, everything's fine. So that was fun. But this isn't just a book about drugs. It's really an investigation Huxley was undertaking of what the mind is and what consciousness is. It touches on some really big questions, and one of the favorite things I learned from the book was a theory by philosopher Henry Bergson, who thought of the mind as this reducing valve that most of the time is filtering out information that's not useful for us. There's an infinite amount of facts out there, and we're only experiencing a very narrow bandwidth of that. But psychedelics have the potential to open that valve back up and allow us to experience things that are usually being filtered out of our awareness. It's a quick read. Huxley's writing really brings the whole psychedelic experience to life. Doors of Perception, really enjoyed it. All right, next on the list we have On the Origins of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life by Charles Darwin. What a title. A book like this generally doesn't end up on people's reading lists because I guess they're kind of taken for granted in a lot of ways, but I'm really interested in the origins of evolutionary theory, and I'm also amazed at the confidence that people have in these ideas, even though they usually haven't read the source material. I grew up going to a Christian school, and there's this ongoing tension between science and religion that's ingrained in you early on, no matter what side you come down on. And Darwin's theory is usually at the center of that debate. But it's so interesting, when you actually read Origins of Species, you find out Darwin didn't really think it was a big deal. He thought you could have faith and an understanding of a higher power, but separately, if you're trying to study the world through a scientific lens, you have to use the tools of science to do that. And the Bible isn't a scientific tool, and rightly so. We shouldn't want it to be. So he was adopting a scientific approach. One idea doesn't necessarily have to act in opposition to the other. In fact, he wanted to be a minister before he devoted his life to science. And he wasn't as religious later on in his life. He considered himself agnostic. But there's a lot more nuance there than people think. It's really cool to read the theories on natural selection, studies on ants and finches, petrology. I got a lot out of reading what he had to say, and I feel more balanced in my understanding of science having read the book, and I think it should be on everyone's reading list. So book number 3 is by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. It's called On Anger. I got this copy of his collected works last year, and I started reading Seneca's essay that he wrote to his brother, who was a proconsul in Greece and needed help controlling his anger so that he could make better decisions. Seneca walks us through his definition of anger, why it plays such an important role in our lives, and then he offers us tools that can help us to control it. And I like the vibe of this book a lot. It's probably one of the best that I've ever read about self-improvement and getting a firm grip on this thing that all of us deal with every day. There's a video that I made breaking down the book in more detail if you're interested. The link is down in the description. I would definitely go check that out. Next up at number 4 on the list is Emile Zola's novel, Germinal. So I took a lit course over the summer, and we had to read 4 books in 4 weeks. It was brutal, and I'm a slow reader anyways, so it was really tough. We read Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Madame Bovary, and this was the last book on the list, the final week, and honestly, I was pretty burnt out at that point, and I had never heard of Germinal before, so I wasn't necessarily looking forward to it. But this book ended up being my favorite of the entire class. It's about a community of French coal miners in the 1860s who revolt against the mining company that they work for because of the poverty that they live in and the arduous quality of the life that was a product of industrialization. Zola was the father of a movement called naturalism, which combined Darwin's theory of natural selection with an artistic movement called realism, which is just telling stories about real life as opposed to the epics and the myths of the past. He thought that you could use a scientific approach to building stories, and the theater of a narrative could act as a lab to study human life. In other words, let's create these characters, put them into a situation in a petri dish of a plot, if you will, and a setting, and then try to figure out what would unfold in real life. It's a really great book. It touches on a lot of ideas: determinism versus free will, capitalism versus socialism, rich versus poor, men versus women. It's a visceral story. It's like smelling salts in book form. You're gonna be awake, you're gonna be more alert, it's gonna sting a little bit, and you might even cry, but it's worth it. Excellent book. So finally, I want to talk about one of the best books that I've read so far in 2022. The last book on my list here is a poem by John Milton called Paradise Lost. Now, why read a poem that's almost 400 years old? It's basically a longer, harder to read version of the Adam and Eve story, right? Well, not exactly. You see, the version in Genesis focuses a lot on God, obviously, and Adam and Eve, and a snake convinces them to eat a piece of fruit, and they get kicked out of the garden, and they're not too happy about that because now they have to suffer and die and stuff. But Milton's version focuses on a different character. Instead of telling the story from the top-down original point of view, he reconstructed the story from the bottom up. Paradise Lost is all about Satan's story and his fall from heaven into hell. And the reason it's worth reading in 2022 is because I see it as the first literary exploration of human psychology. I made a full video breaking down the story of what led to Satan's fall and why that matters to us, and why scientists today working on technologies like CRISPR that can edit genes need to give the devil his due and learn from the lessons in this story so we don't make those same mistakes again. So that's a wrap up of my list of the top 5 books that I've read so far in 2022. There's a lot more on my list for the rest of this year I'm looking forward to. I'm going to read Bukowski for the first time, a couple of books by Emerson, a few history books. I'm reading The Double Helix right now. If you could, leave a comment and let me know if there's any good books that you've read that you think I should add to my list. And if you like that video, there's another one that you should watch that I made about the best books that should be on your list in 2022. That video is right here. Thank you for your time, everybody. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to see you in the next one. Bye.